it's not up to me to define student success. It's up to every individual student to make sure that they've reached their own goals, whatever they may be.
For a lot of our student success is not just the destination, the journey, their experience, their time in higher education is an important part of whether that's been a successful part of that.
Universities are here for people, for the society, to create some intellectual debate. They are made of humans, for humans. So don't be afraid to be a human.
That was Jean Mutton, Michael Doherty, and Radka Newton, in that order, the co-authors of the fantastic book, Transforming Higher Education with Human-Centered Design. We had a great conversation about defining student success, the role that design can play in creating successful programs and services and systems, and how design can help institutions change and get real results. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Radka, Jean, and Michael, I'm so excited for today's conversation about the role that human-centered design can play in student success. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
I think a great way to get started is to hear how you all did. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you got started in higher ed.
For me, the journey in higher education really started when I was 18. I stuck with it, and I've been a student and an educator in so many different education contexts and different cultures. It really made me think about student experience, changing educational institutions, going to different countries. What does it feel like? So I went through my degrees and then stuck with it as an academic and a professional member of staff as well. But that sort of student experience has always been very close to my heart because of what I have personally gone.
Thanks, Radka.
I'm a legal academic. I'm a full professor. I have the honor of being the first professor of legal design in the world. I hope there's many more
That's awesome.
Following from me. Why HE for me? Because I see the way in which education transforms people's lives. I'm the first member of my family who stayed in education beyond the age of 16 years old. And it's certainly absolutely transformed my life in that 30, 40 years since. I've mentioned my family. One thing that working in HE allows me to do is to live according to values that I learned from my family. So values of respect and respecting the people. And also when things are going wrong in people's lives, having a bit of compassion and a bit of empathy for them. So it's a privilege to be able to live according to those values in my educational practice.
Thanks, Michael. How about you, Jean?
Yeah, I started out in 1982 as an administration assistant at Brighton Polytechnic, and I was the ministering secretary for the academic board, the Senate, the council, and some of the subcommittees as well. So I very early on got a really good understanding of how a large, complex organisation like a university works from the machinery side of things, if you like. But I was a long way from the students in that sort of role. And since then, I've led administration and teams and management teams across a range of student functions from admissions right through to graduation. I had a graduation ceremony once. I thought I started turning grey. But it was a great experience. It was nice to do that because in administration, you don't often get a lot of positive feedback about what it is that you're doing. But when you actually see a graduation ceremony and you see the joy and you see the parents and you get the whole feeling of how wonderful it is to actually finish your degree, if that's what you intend to do, then that was fabulous. So I managed a lot of roles, both from the centre and from faculty-based teams as well. And they just gave me a good understanding. And then I got closer and closer to the students, the student experience, started doing systems thinking and lean processes for efficiency and effectiveness. and then discovered service design. And that was it for me. Everything just fell into place. And that was my career from there on in.
Those are three different and great stories. And what's interesting is you all talked about people, whether your own experience, your family, the students you're working with, whether you're close or far from them, the memories they make, the experiences they have. I guess that's no surprise because your work is all about putting people at the center of things and designing around and for people, not systems or spaces, and where we sometimes lose track of things or lose sight of things. So that's really great to hear. And I would love to like pulling on that thread about people and students and their experience, getting to graduation and all the steps to get there, the machinery, Jean, as you mentioned. I'd love to hear your definition of student success.
One of the things that we love about design is that we don't proceed on the basis of assumptions, and we try to have top-down approaches. So for each of our students, their version of success is going to be slightly different. The only way for us as educators to find that out is by asking them. So that basic metric of students passing and getting a grade is going to be a really important criterion success for really all of our students. But there's an awful lot that's involved in an idea of success. And speaking to our students, they really value their education for the way in which it empowers them. They want to be people with agency in society. They want to develop skills in relation to communication, persuasion, and handling complex information and working in teams. For an awful lot of our students, certainly recently, one of the things they look for in higher education is to be able to develop their confidence. That's a really important measure of success. And I think Radka's got more to say about this. But for a lot of our students, success is not just the destination, that the journey, their experience, their time in higher education is an important part of whether that's been a successful part of their life.
I like that. I like that definition a lot. You're thinking about the destination and the journey, and it's the credential, it's the skills, it's the confidence, but not as the end, as the means, or to be empowered to be able to do new things and think new thoughts. That's really great. What are some of the things that make a good destination and a good journey,
If I can just
or a successful destination and
absolutely.
journey?
That stuff, maybe that traditional success was some stuff, acquisition of knowledge for
Mhm.
students. So I have a knowledge and then I'm equipped with the knowledge. But I think at the moment, what I'm hearing from the students is really that stuff opportunity to become a bit more rounded person, that stuff ability to gain that richer relational experience during their university time. And I think that stuff, that's really something very different from how maybe traditionally we assume that the education operates. So that's becoming very important to us. Our students are changing as well. So that's sort of acknowledgement that we now have maybe more mature students coming back to education or students who don't live on campus. So it's also acknowledging their personal journeys and their personal circumstances outside the classroom, not just in the classroom. That's driving stuff. Our approach as the designerly approach is important here because we're really looking at that stuff changing nature of the student needs. And then that also helps us define that success and that path that they want to embark on in their life.
I think it's not up to me to define student success. It's up to every individual student to make sure that they've reached their own goals, whatever they may be. And I think there's a lot of external monitoring of universities now where we look at universities by league tables, by value added, by a number of firsts or careers post university. But every student will want something different, and not every student will want a first. I can remember during a retention project talking to a student who said, "I'm the captain of the rugby club. I've had a fantastic 3 years. I might have got to, but I'm happy as I can be," and that's great. He had a positive story to tell. And even with tension, when students were having to leave their course at various points for various reasons, as long as the student walked away for the right reason with a positive outcome, that's fine. And I think that's an important point to bear in mind, that we shouldn't, as Michael said at the start, we shouldn't assume what the needs and ambitions are of our students. They have their individual goals that they want to attain.
Yeah, I've heard that answer that students define it for themselves, and it's our job to listen and help them get there. I think is really, that's a great way to answer it. it goes back centering on the human, on the students. That no surprise there. That makes a lot of sense. And your work, your book, your fantastic book, Transforming Higher Education with Human-Centered Design, which I highly recommend. I think it's a great compilation of informational case studies and the role that design can play in higher ed. I think it starts off with one of my favorite definitions of design, which is so broad, right? Herbert Simon, you're going to paraphrase things as they are to things as you want them to be, or current state to a better state. And I think about design that way with such broad potential. And I measure the power of an idea based on how difficult it is to unlearn. It's sort of, once you learn Newton's theory of relativity or like Freud's theory of the unconscious, like you can't see the world the way you did before. And design is like that. For me, I can't help but see its power and potential. And I feel the same. That sort of comes off every page in your book. And I would love to hear from you the role that you think design can play, or human-centered design, perhaps more specifically, or maybe even service design as an offshoot of that. But what role can design play in student success, in creating better journeys and better destinations and empowering students and sing on that?
I don't know if you've come across Lou Downs' book, Good Servant, but she's got a fantastic quote in there about what is a service. A service is something that helps someone to do something. And I think it's important that we ensure that our universities are designed in such a way that the students are able to be students and do what they want to do. And as I said at the outset, universities are large, complex organisations. I have heard them described as 30 organisations that share a car park, because quite often there are silos and there are issues around effectiveness and efficiency. And sometimes it's hard for individual areas, departments, to actually see where their piece of the jigsaw makes up the bigger picture. And particularly from the professional services side, we've got all the various different departments coming together and then working closely with academics and students as well is not an easy thing to do. And one thing that we've all seen how design could play a fantastic part in that is if you're doing something like journey mapping or you're doing service blueprinting, and all the key stakeholders need to be part of that to draw that map out. And everybody then has a better understanding of their role within the larger organisation and how if they do something in one place, it can impact on what happens further down the line. And a project like developing a student journey map or developing a service blueprint actually gives a voice to the people who may be sometimes on the backstage as opposed to the front stage with regard to student contact or the student facing. And it actually it helps everybody understand that the whole organisation needs to work together to make the student experience the best that it can be. And the designly approach, the designly methods really help an understanding and a fundamental ground of how that works.
A more personal story of how human-centered design can be used effectively in supporting students. So I'd worked for about 25 years in a different law school in the north of England. And towards the end of my time there, a bit like you, I discovered design and the world never quite looked the same after the problems that landed on my desk. I just perceived them differently and I approached them differently. So we did a curriculum redesign that was a full kind of end-to-end design project. We used the 5 stages of the Stanford model of design thinking, did all those different stages, etc. But around about 5 years ago, I moved to my current law school, and they had a need for that kind of, sort of design-centered approach to student experience. So the student numbers had gone up, the student positivity had gone down. There were risks to the reputation and league table position, not only of the law school, but of the wider organization. Our comparison group who we compared ourselves with were other kind of high reputation law schools in England. So that was the job I was given, really, to turn around student experience and student positivity. And I took completely a design approach to doing it. So I did a full service safari. It's very common for us to observe our colleagues teaching, but it's not very common for us to spend time with students and to trail around after them and to follow in their footsteps and to see what our class is like from their perspective and see what our virtual learning environments are like from their perspective. So I learned an awful lot from that. I looked at the tone of communications that the school had with its students, kind of distant, formal. I looked at the overall relationship between the body of students and the staff of the faculty, and it wasn't a particularly warm, harmonious relationship. So we worked a lot on the student perspective and on the tone of communications and on clarity of expectations. And to be honest with you, it's really worked. It really turned around student positivity. That comparison group, we're now 10, 12 points above them on overall satisfaction with teaching, satisfaction with assessment, and student support. This might be a bold claim, but I think though the past 5 years, we've become the best research-intensive law school for student experience in England. That's really been done by a process of human-centered design.
That sounds like a transformation using human-centered design. I love it. Can we briefly pull on this thread of legal design, Mike, while you have the mic? What is that, given that you're the first to have that title and bring those two worlds together? Let's pull on that a little bit.
Thanks for the question. I would say I'm not the first person to bring those two threads together. There were real trailblazers who beat out this path before me. There are very many people in the legal world and also in design who are really puzzled by the juxtaposition of the two words. But essentially,
it's like jumbo shrimp or something.
You can think of anything as product, like a contract can be a product. You can think of anything as a service, like a legal advice in relation to a property matter or a company transaction. If you think about systems, so the whole of the legal system could be approached of this. If you think about experiences, like the experiences of people who attend courts without the support of a legal advisor. So all those things, products, systems, services, experiences have been subjective design thinking and design processes really from the late 80s, early 90s. It's really over the last 10 years that we've tested those mindsets, those methodologies, and we've introduced them to transform how contracts are drafted and how they appear, how legal information is presented, how legislation is drafted. We're at the start of a real revolution, really, in relation to how law can be accessed and how it can feel for America. It's very exciting.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it makes perfect sense as you say it like that. You have products and services and systems, and why shouldn't they be designed like others to create a better experience for people? And I like the discussion of the application of human-centered design to higher ed. And you all mentioned a series of the kind of tried and true methods, right? Service blueprints and journey maps and service safaris. And also the idea that it's by its very definition, a holistic approach, a collaborative approach. So it's great for busting silos and bringing people together, which is certainly a passion of mine. That's what my whole book, The Connected College, is all about, is how folks can work better together to enable student success. And that all sounds great. What do you say to your critics who are dismissive of this and saying this isn't data, this is just like Post-its on a whiteboard, or this is just the kind of like fluffy stuff by people who wear black turtlenecks and horn-rimmed glasses and have complicated shoes?
A lot of what happens in higher education is very much about communicating rules and regulations to students. So there's a lot of similarities here as well. So that stuff, data and the rehumanization of maybe law, of how can you humanize the notion of signing a contract and maybe simplify it so that both parties agree. But for those critics who don't believe that their lived experience is data as well, it brings it home when you start thinking about maybe your examples from your personal life. And the law is a really good example. So examples from getting divorced or buying a house, signing any agreements and stuff in this sense. I think the statistical data, yes, is important, but then contextualizing the data through the lived experience data addition, it's widely recognized as a method in any sector. In the UK, we've been greatly inspired by the health sector that is really looking at what does it feel like to be a patient. And you can't argue with that. Every single one of us has been in a hospital for some reason or another. We've all experienced some feelings associated to being admitted or talking to a doctor, maybe our blood test results. This goes beyond what is written on the paper about our diagnosis. So I think acknowledging the participation and that work with those people who experience the data in their personal way, there is no argument to be had. So usually with people who are a bit skeptical, all of us, when we go to forum like this, we usually start with, do you remember when you had to buy your house or when you had to sign a mortgage agreement? Do you remember? What was it like? What did it feel like? And that straight away switches people on. People understand that straight away. So why should it be different in higher education? Why should it be different to know what does it feel like to be a student? What does it feel like being sent from one door to another? What does it feel like to have to commute and maybe miss the bus and then miss the lecture and being maybe branded as the lazy student? These analogies, they are all around us, and maybe we don't talk about it enough, but I think sort of the recognition for anybody who is critical about this approach hopefully resonates with their own sort of lived experience.
Yeah, I love that point that lived experience is data. And it reminds me back to the point you made, Michael, about assumptions. And that's how you debunk assumptions, I think, sometimes. But another simple one I encounter all the time is, someone with their camera off on a Zoom call or a Teams call is disengaged. But sometimes that person is actually the most engaged person because they've joined the call despite something else going on. They're not feeling well, they're doing something's happening at home, they're eating lunch, and they're still showing up. So I think those assumptions are really dangerous. And it's great to hear not just the stats, but also the stories. I think one book that did such a pivotal and terrific job of that here in the States was Tony Jack's book, The Privileged Poor, talking about first-gen low-income students in higher ed. And he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, which I think opened a lot of people's eyes, because even if you'd been reading the stats, it wasn't until you heard the story of him, a student at Amherst College, where they do a much better job now, but at the time, during breaks, all the dining halls were closed. But what if you don't have enough money for a plane ticket home or a drive home? So you have to stay on campus during fall break. And he's like trudging or winter break, he's like trudging in the snow to buy a loaf of Wonder Bread and peanut butter at the pharmacy because there's no place to eat on campus, and the meal plan that he paid for isn't giving him any food. So I think that the lived experience is data. I think that's really critical.
I think this is a genuine problem. I think it's a genuine problem for those of us who are trying to bring human-centered design into different fields like law or higher education. And it's partly because there are big cultural differences between how we do things in design and how traditional organizations, traditional program making policies are coming up with role and approaches. And a lot of the language that we use in design will just immediately turn off the senior people within our fields. So fast, fail, quick, etc. And some of the kind of the visual tropes of design, as you say, like post-it notes and the vignettes and all this. And that's why I think that we need to focus on the fact that this works, that this delivers
the outcomes,
positive and practical outcomes. And that's the story that we need to tell to the powerful people within our sectors, because that's what they're interested in. They're interested in positive outcomes. And perhaps we need to underplay some of the language of design and some of the playfulness that we bring to our work. We need to hold on to that ourselves, but the way in which we present ourselves to the people who are in charge of the resource allocations and the purse strings is really about positive outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, to counter critics, going back to your question, Elliot, it's about, as you said, Mike, it's about demonstrating impact. It's the work that you've done at Lancaster in the law school, where you have turned around that student experience for the positive. And in my experience in working with universities, if you can get a small project going somewhere that can demonstrate benefit, can demonstrate value, even though those hard dyed-in-the-wool critics will be going, oh, there's something interesting going on over there, I might just want a piece of that. How did you get there? And in that way, it begins to spread the word, which is what we're trying to do. But there's also not enough, thank you for mentioning the book, that was very kind, but there's not enough literature, there's not enough documented evidence about how design is working in the macro or the micro level within higher education. And that's something the three of us have very much been on a mission to try and do something about with this anthology that we've pulled together. And I think it's actually, it's a way of showcasing the excellent work that is actually going on across the globe in this sphere. It's certainly growing. And as I say, it's about actually pointing people towards success stories, I think, is the important thing.
Yeah, and those, the currency of colleges and universities, right, are those success stories from peer or aspirant institutions that you can learn from and you can adapt and you can apply. Let's think about how this is changing. You know, we've been talking about how design can help make changes, like in the destination or the journey or student satisfaction, legal or otherwise. We're not standing still. You're designing for a world that's rapidly evolving, whether it's AI or quantum computing or changing demographics, whatever cultural norms. What do you see as the big changes that in higher education, and how can design help us?
So higher education recognized, I think, that students do need to be put in the center, not just as a rhetoric or as a lip service, but to do this truly, they need some sort of mechanisms. But I've been thinking about how this has been really put into practice and what sort of design as a way in, what can design really contribute to really putting that human in the center. And I feel like for me, the main benefit of design is that stuff's almost leveling up the voice of all those stakeholders involved. And we again started talking a lot about co-creation in higher education. And again, that also requires much flatter structures that we currently operate. So for me, I suppose my wish as well is that design does help us change a little bit the structure and the power and the hierarchy in higher education, so that people who are involved, those who are in the classroom or helping with the administration or supporting students in the colleges, but students themselves, that the voices are equally recognized and they are represented around the table. So we're seeing big changes in the UK, probably through the creation of the Office for Students, who are really keeping an eye on this agenda of students in the center. But we are seeing students on committees, students represented in decision making. And I think this has been a result of that sort of human-centric design and thinking about that sort of more equal participation. And again, I think in the UK, we have learned a lot from the government. So the government has really put the citizen in the center and has really started applying human-centered design in a lot of way citizens are served in this democratic state. I think that sort of examples that we have around, again, really helped inform higher education. And I think that sort of concept of human-centered design is more visible, I think, in higher education. Definitely in the past 5 years, people have started applying the methods and the approaches. And I have definitely seen a big change in students being involved in the debate, not post hoc as some sort of afterthought or just confirming the decisions, but being truly involved and truly involved as co-creators and agents, rather than just somebody who is consulted after just to confirm what we've always known.
Right. Yeah. What we do at Brightspot, we did and now Bureau Happold, a national student experience survey in the U.S., and it looks at different dimensions of student experience, and one of them is the kind of campus culture and community. And consistently, the lowest rating is having a say in what happens at my school. But I do think it's also improving, right? Because students want to have more of a say, and design is a great tool to get that broader perspective, voice, more at the table, the co-creating, all the things we've been talking about. So in our last 5 minutes here, I would love to hear each of your prescriptions. If you're going to write out a prescription for how institutions can use human-centered design to increase student success, what would it be?
For me, I think it would be building capacity with everybody, for educators and people who are supporting education within the higher education world. So it'd be the professional services, the academics. It would be about developing that open mindset that you need to have, leaving your ideas at the door, being prepared to listen, watch, learn, And you talked about how does design respond to the changing world, AI and the pandemic and all of that. I think having that open mindset, that vulnerability allows you to face change in a more real way and with a better outcome, rather than having a particularly stuck mindset. So for me, it would be all about building capacity with teams and with a designerly, if that's the right word, mindset.
One of the many things I love about design is that it's very pragmatic and a very situated practice. So there isn't a definitive list of best practice tools that are on the shelf that you can take off and apply in some blunt way within your own organization. First step is always to understand your users. In our case, that means speaking to the students. It also means asking them the type of questions that we don't normally ask them. So don't limit yourself to asking them on a scale of 1 to 5, are you happy with the assessment regime on this particular program? You can ask them questions about, what do you tell your family and your friends about being a student on this program? Do you have friends in your classroom? What do you feel that you can do now that you couldn't do at the start of the program? What's been the biggest challenge you faced over the course of your studies? What's been your proudest moment? We can really tap in to trying to understand our students, not just our students, but as human beings that have full, rich lives. Not all of their life involves their contact with their particular program, with their particular department. And this is a final thing. The pragmatic part of what I love about design is that there is no strict template. It's not an all or nothing practice. There is this is what you have to do when you do step 1 and step 2 and step 3 and step 4. So my advice to people who are interested in this is to pick up some sort of toolkit. That might be our book, it might be your book, Elliot. Just pick up a toolkit in relation to how to do human-centered design or tools you can use in service design, and just start mixing them into your own practice. So that could be doing user experience research, using ideation techniques, prototyping or journey mapping or whatever it is. This is one of those things where the most valuable learning happens through the process of doing and seeing what the results are. So give it a go, is what I would say.
Universities are here for people, for the society, to create some intellectual debate. They are made of humans, for humans. So don't be afraid to be a human. And let's not glorify human doing. Let's glorify human being, people with emotions. It is absolutely okay to have feelings and show feelings and acknowledge feelings as data. And I really plea to everybody out there who works in any sort of education to have that confidence, to have the feelings, so that the young people that we're working with also know that the emotional capital that they bring to the world is as important as the knowledge that we create together. So be a being, not a doing.
Great perspectives on higher ed, how it's changing, and the role that design can play in student success. I really appreciate all your insights today, and the book Transforming Education with Human-Centered Design, which is impact of those insights. And as you say, not just the stats, but the stories of transformation that people can learn from and apply and take us from the current state to a better future state. So thank you all very much, Radka, Michael, and Jean.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.